basic Excel. We'll be considering formulas from the last lesson, but in particular we're going to be talking about absolute reference. Well, what is absolute reference? Absolute reference really is when we use dollar signs in our formulas. So something like this equals $A, $1. That is what we call absolute reference using dollars. Okay, well, I'm going to explain what it is and why it's useful. Basically, it's useful because it keeps our formulas constant when we drag. Let's see what that means. Last video we considered the formulas. Here we typed in or E equals A1 plus A2 equals and so on. And then the next thing we did, and we showed in particular how we could drag down. I'll just get rid of those last two. And we were able to drag our formula down. Now, can we always do that? Well, maybe. Let's try it. Well, and you also recall what I did. I put here a number, so a number 2. Instead of typing the number 2 in, I worked like this. I said equals, and then I pressed equals, and then I put the number, and then multiply by this, and then I did the same thing. I'm doing it longhand because it doesn't work if I drag down. So equals and multiply by that, tick, and then equals that, multiply by that, and that's fine. So that's all working very well. Well, and so if I change that to a 3, for example, the whole point of this, if I change that, well, that could be even a value of VAT and 20% or something. That would, you could try that if you like. Type in 20% and see what the VAT would be on each of those numbers. So that's the idea, that you would be able to change this value here in D1 simply, and the whole lot would change in an instant. So what about how do we produce those formulas, and how we can produce those formulas most efficiently? Well, I'm going to delete these ones here, and then look at the top formula. It says equals A1 by D1, and you'll notice when I drag down, it changed the A1. Well, let's have it. Previously, when I dragged down, it changed the A1 into A2 into A3. Well, let's see if it works. I'm going to now drag this down and see, oh dear, it hasn't worked. Well, let's see what's happened here. This one has got to be right because I typed it in. But this one I've dragged down. Now let's take the A1 is correct, but the D1 has changed into D2, unfortunately. Well, you know, Excel is doing its best. And then it says equals A3. The A3 is correct, but look, it's referring to D3, and we don't want it to refer to D3. What we've got to do now is to apply a sort of a straitjacket for D. Now, let's take a look how this works. I'm going to click into the cell. Now, take a look at this D1 over here. What I'm going to do is very carefully click here in between the D and the 1. Now, you could click to the left, but I'll click in the middle of the D and the 1. Do you see that? Click here, and I'm going to press the F4 key top of the keyboard, F4, and it puts dollar signs in for me. Now those dollar signs act as like a straitjacket. It won't allow the D1 to move. Let's see what that means. If I click the tick, the formula is fine, it's multiplying by 3. But now, if I drag down, it gives me the right answer. Why? Let me click in the second one down. Well, the first one is correct because we typed it in. It has to be correct. But look at the next one. When I drag down, it changed the A1 into A2, but it didn't change the D1 because the D1 is surrounded by dollar signs. Absolute reference. It's like, as I mentioned, a straitjacket. It won't allow D1 to move. And if I type in the next one, that's also got the D1 as well. So you see, D1, absolute reference, is a means of keeping formulas constant when you drag down. Do I need, if I look back in the first, how does this dollar sign stuff work? Well, the dollar actually makes what is on the right of it always constant. So that dollar there says the D is constant. And this dollar here says the 1 is constant. Well, which one could we do without? Let me think. D1 to the 1 has to remain the same, doesn't it? So if I get rid of that one and drag down, yes, that's correct. But it takes so much thought. I find it's not worth the worry. You just put $ everywhere, and it doesn't matter. Incidentally, when you did press the F4 key, if I click back in it and I press the F4, it'll toggle through all the possibilities that you've got. Don't worry about all of that. Just as long as you put $, you could type them in if you want to. Either side of you've got two $, one to the left of the D and one to the left of the 1. Okay, and that's absolute reference. So obviously now if I change this value here to something else, everything works just fine. Let's just try out some simple operations now. I'll just make this a bit bigger on formatting and so on. We've got a set of values and we want to put it into a table and we glamorize it a little bit. And we can add up the columns. So we could say this is, we could use our auto sum up the top here, or you could type in equals A1 plus A2 plus A3 if you want to, but it's probably best just to use our auto sum and click on that. Now, if we take a look at our formula, sum A1 to A3, and I click that because I agree with that, then I think I'll just do these the long way to start off with. I'll show you shortcuts in a moment. While I'm here, I think I might just make them say red, and so we can see what we're doing, and maybe make them bold as well. So now the next one, I'll do the same thing. I've got auto sum here. I click it, and I agree with it. I can check my formula out, and I can just agree with that and click the tick. I'll try the next one, auto sum. If I'm confident what I'm doing, I could actually double click the auto sum. See, and it does it all in one go. It doesn't give you a chance to change your mind. I could try a little bit of a shortcut here. I could just highlight both of those and then do a double click on my auto sum. In fact, it works if I highlight this. You could try this yourself, but strangely enough, it works if you highlight that region as well. So I'm just going to double click on that and you can see the result. Now I'll make these ones red as well, just to see, I can see clearly where I am, and maybe make them bold as well. And then click in here. Now let's try this auto sum again. So I'll click once. Now you can see that it's right. It's A1 to E1, so it's doing the right thing. So I can click the tick. Now I'll do the next one longhand as well. That's working fine. E2 to. So you see how it's lassoing here, this lot here. So I'll click the tick as well. I'll try the next one, auto sum. Oops. Now you see, give Excel a chance. It's doing its best. It says, oh, you want to add up these numbers here, but I don't. Now what you need to do is to go and lasso the ones that you want. Now watch carefully. I'm just going to now click here and don't let go for goodness sake, and drag across to the 21. Now don't go and lasso yourself over here. Come back to the 21, and when you're happy, a bit precarious, and then let it go. And then you can now click the tick, and you can see it's added up all of the numbers for me. I could do a grand total here. I could click my auto sum, and it's adding up those. Well, I guess it doesn't matter which ones we add up, it's going to give the same result. I could go and lasso these ones. I'll leave that there for the moment. So that's our grand total. I'll now insert a row at the top. So if I click anywhere in the top row at all, and then it's probably best to right click here, click on insert, and then entire row is what I want here, and then click OK. If I want to insert a column, I click anywhere in the first column, and it should insert a column to the left. So if I insert and then entire column and click OK, and that's fine. I can put some headings in here, make this Monday's takings, and then drag across, and you'll see the autofill gives me up to Friday. You can see that Friday. Be careful not to drag too far and let it go. And then I can say this is week 1 of the takings for the, and I can also drag that down. Strangely enough, the 1 becomes 2 becomes 3. If I type in here the total is what I want, I think I'll make that red. I could pick up the formatting from here if you use Format Painter. If I click on this and then I go to my Format Painter, which is here, and then click here and then paint the total like that. I need another total up the top here, so I'll just do a control drag. So hold down the control key and just drag that up to here, and that should copy that as well. Now, I'd like now to format the headings. I've changed my mind. I want them all red across here and all red down here. So I shouldn't have done the total in red already, but it doesn't matter. Now, let's see what I do. I'm going to click here, and that will highlight the whole of the row. In other words, any other stuff I put in here will be the same formatting as I'm going to apply now. I'm going to make them all red, and then I'm going to make them bold as well. And I might even right align them as well, which is this one here. Okay, now I'm going to do the same for the column. But something strange happens here. If I click on the A, I'm going to make the whole of that column the same, red and bold. But take a look. It says up here that it's showing that it's bold already. Well, it's not. This week 1, it might look a bit bold, but it's not. So what we need to do after many years of experience is we have to actually take the bold off and then put it on. You see, that makes them bold, and then I can also make them red, and that's sort of, yeah, that's what I want. We put on our formulas in quite the long way, really. I'll just show you an easier way that we could have put them in. I'll first of all just delete. Well, I'll delete most of them, and I'll leave that formula intact. It says sum B2 to D4. Well, what we could just do is to simply drag it across, and that will do the same thing. And you can check the formulas as you go across. It's changed the C to D to E and so on. And we can do exactly the same thing with here. We can drag that down as well. That makes life a lot easier when we do that. Indeed, there is a very simple way of doing all this. If I delete all of my formulas this time, and if I carefully highlight that and I leave some space for my totals, then all we need to do is to actually, you probably think I've been wasting your time all this up to now. All you need to do is to double click on that, and that just puts all the formulas in for you in one go, you see. So just shows you how flexible Excel is. Let's make a simple chart of this. The first thing we do is to make sure our cursor, insertion point or whatever, is in the table itself, not outside like that. Anywhere inside. We used to have to highlight the whole thing, but now it's sufficient just to put it in there. We can go to Insert and then choose a chart. Well, simple column chart will do us for the moment. And look how easy it is. You just click that and I'll just bring that down slightly. And that will then, I think the first thing that people want to know when they make a chart is how you delete it. So you have to carefully click on the very outside of the chart and then press the delete, and I assure you it'll disappear. So I'll click away now. But what really amazes me is this. Let's see how they're grouped down here, Monday, Tuesday, and so on. Let's just focus on something, on Monday week 1. Well, Monday week 1 is a bluish color here, and there's this one just here. So just watch this. If I go to 23 and I make it 123, so well, maybe about yeah, 123. All right, we'll see what happens. 120. I change it drastically. Look what happens to my chart. Instantly, I press enter. You're watching down here. Look at that. It increases it dynamically. So your charts, your Excel charts are dynamic. You've got all sorts of other pie charts and things which you can quite easily investigate through here, through the different types of. The scatter chart is an interesting one. If you just want a line, draw a line of plotting points, this is the one that you use. You might think you'd use the line chart, but you can investigate those or yourself. I want to talk about percentages. They can be a bit tricky. They're not as easy as within Excel to deal with as you might expect. Actually, there is a bit of a difference between mathematical using percentages in Excel. A very subtle difference, but it can cause confusion. First of all, if we have, say, 0.5, and we want to make that into a percentage, a couple of ways we can do it. We can go straight up here and click on the percentage, or we can go through the menu here, format cells, and then choose percentage. Just at the moment, I don't want any decimal places, so I'll just reduce that down to 0. And of course, that gives us 50%. But remember that I typed in 0.5, and indeed, the whole point of this is that 0.5 is what is in that cell, not 50. 0.5. Because if I were to type 50% in here and enter, that is exactly the same thing. Believe me, that is 0.5. Just with that was 0.5. Because I just typed in 50%. The act of typing the percent automatically formats it as a percentage. Let me show you. If I now go to format cells and take a look in percentage, you see it's been formatted. It was previously a number like this up the top or general. Now it's actually, Excel has done it for us. It's converted that to a formatted percentage. Now I could just confirm that. Do you remember how I used control graph to show me the formulas in the embedded? Well, I'll do control graph again. Remember, the graph is just below the escape key. So if I do control graph, take a look. It says they're both 0.5. So please think of that in the background as being 0.5. I'll just return that by toggle. Toggle means you press the same key to do it backwards. And that brings you back to where we were. And each of these is 0.5. So let's say we wanted to find 50% of 120. We'll type 120 in here. And now this is the important bit. I type in 50. And if I type in percent, that is 0.5. It is not 50. So now if I multiply this by that and then multiply by that, I am multiplying 120 by 0.5. And the answer is 60. Now just let me confuse you by doing this in a mathematical way. I'm going to find 50% of that. So I'm going to say that, well, I'll put the 50 here. But that's 50, not 0.5. So mathematically, which is the way we do them in GCSE, is equal to that. And now I'm going to multiply by the 50, so it's multiply by 50, but we must now divide by 100. You might recognize that as your traditional way of doing it. 120 by 50 over 100, 120 by half, which gives you the same answer. But you must recognize the difference between these two procedures and work out what people are doing within the spreadsheet, whether using the old mathematical way of doing it or using the Excel way of doing it. Now, the Excel way of doing it, it will convert that automatically for you into 0.5, and that is the big difference. If I want to change the percentage here, this is the Excel, I'll call this the Excel way of doing things, and I'll call this the math way of doing things. So I think we really ought to just ignore the math way for the moment. I'll just give that a light color. How about that? And concentrate on Excel's method. Now, obviously we can change the value in here, and it will obviously calculate 50% of that. But what about if you want to change the percentage? If I want to make that 25%, I type 25, and that is sufficient. I just type 25, and that will give me the result. And it will interpret that as, what will it interpret that as being in the background? 0.25. Let me just confirm that. I'll do a control graph, and you see it is indeed 0.5. You'll notice the 50 down here is just 50. Okay. We see here that 25% of 240 gives you 60. I might ask the question the other way around. If I have 240 and I have the answer, so to speak, 60, what percentage is 240 of, is 60, get this, 60 of 240? What percentage is 60 of 240? Well, you know the answer, 25%, but let's see how we work it out from scratch. So we put in here equals. Formulas always start with an equal. I said, what percentage is this 60 of? So I'm going to put the 60 on the top, divided by the 240. What do you think the answer is going to be? 0.25. I'm looking for percentage here. So I will therefore convert that to a percentage. If I then format the cells and then I change it to a percentage and click OK, then it shows me 25%. I might want to reduce the number of decimal places, which I can do up here. Decrease the number of decimal places if you wish. So I think I would suggest you stick with the Excel method of doing things. The only problem is that you might come across someone's spreadsheet and they might use what I would call the math way of doing it. I'm a bit loath to do this, but I'm going to show you the math way of doing the same thing that we just did here. So you can ignore what I'm going to say if you want to. But what I'm going to do is to use the math way of doing this. So I'm going to say equals this divided by this. Well, what's the answer going to be so far? 0.25. Well, the math way, you might say, I'm going to click up here in the formula and then multiply that by 100. And once again, I mean, that's the formula you would have seen in GCSE maths. It gives you the answer of 25, which you have to understand is a percentage. See, I told you I'd confuse you. So let's just ignore that for the moment. As I say, the only time you might want to deal with is if you see someone else doing it in the spreadsheet and you have to realize what they're up to. But just to say again what I did here, I took equals. Well, if I click on this, you see up the top left, it'll show me it's the blue one divided by the green one. But then that gave me an answer of 0.25, remember, and then I go and format it, which I could do up here. I format it as a percentage, but behind what is, here's the thing that you must understand. What is behind that 25%? If you know that, you've understood what I'm talking about. What is behind that 25%? Answer, I'll do control graph. Answer, if I just scroll across a bit. No, it doesn't tell you. Sorry, it tells you the formula. Never mind. I'll go back, control graph. So it did what I asked. It showed me the formula. But believe me, behind there is 0.25, not 25.